First of all, as you probably know, that economic risks are exponentially increasing. And by economic risk, we are talking about damage to property and infrastructure, loss of human life. If we look back 100 years, we clearly see that these risks are exponentially increasing, and the question is, why is that happening? Our research at AIR shows that the primary reason for that is increasing population, more built-up environment, property, infrastructure in high hazardous areas, and to some degree bad policy decisions that have been made that has allowed that unsustainable expansion. Now that does present a number of opportunities, and I like to think about three opportunities. One is in the area of how do we use science, data, modern technology to inform better decisions. And that's what we do at AIR. We talk about developing models. Number two, if the risk can be quantified through the use of such models and tools, then how do we inform decisions to mitigate, to strengthen and make our communities more resilient? And by community, if we do it, we can talk about making entire countries resilient. And that again has its own set of opportunities. And third, I would say, how do we inform decision makers so that they can use such tools to inform decision making based on data, based on science? Now, of course, there are many challenges. I talked about science, and oftentimes it is a matter of understanding climate variability. As the world's climate is changing, and we know the world climate is changing, how does it impact in the future? And there the science is not as developed, so there is some more work to do. Second, risk by inherently is very difficult to communicate. Most people think in short-term time frames. So when you have extreme risks, which inherently are in the long term, and you cannot predict when they are going to occur, people tend to forget about the risk, and it's very difficult, and it's a challenge for us as a community to communicate that risk, both for decision makers as well as bearers of that risk. Well, risk has been better understood, I would say, in the developed countries. For example, the developed countries have mature insurance markets. In terms of mitigation of risk, part of that mitigation strategy is insurance, and therefore a lot of the risk is actually mitigated through risk transfer or various insurance vehicles. Nevertheless, even in developed countries, there are many risks that are not, for example, insured, and therefore there is no escape from it. For example, even in a country like the United States, which has a very mature insurance market, much of the risk from floods are today uninsured. Now, this so-called exposure gap or protection gap is much more profound in developing countries. A, because the awareness of risk is less in developing countries. They have less resources to deal with this, both financial as well as general infrastructure, and therefore the protection gap is enormous. Now, question is, can this be changed? And we think there are many opportunities. These models and tools that I was talking about could be used to improve the risk awareness, how we communicate about risk. For example, in terms of communication, I like to give the example of talking about there is a 0.2% probability of a loss occurring in any given year. Now, that's a very profound statement. However, if that same statement, and it is equivalent, you could say there is a 10% chance of this occurring over the next 50 years. They are mathematically equivalent. However, the impact is much different, and I think that's another area that we need to work on how we communicate about risk to effect better policy action. First of all, at AIR, we specialize in developing models which deal with extremes, both climate extremes as well as weather extremes. And over the last 20 to 30 years, we have developed a wide suite of models. Today, we actually have models that cover over 100 countries globally. So with this suite of models and tools, the insurance industry has been making very judicious decisions on how they estimate risk, how they manage their own risk, and that has proven to be a very good way of dealing with risk as society. Now, we continue to envision that our work will continue. It's not about a static science because there is new learnings, new findings, data is constantly changing, using new technologies. Satellites are constantly observing the Earth, which is generating data every second. We are consumers of that information and informing our models. The way we see our role is to help make objective decisions by quantifying risk so that whether people who are bearing the risk, people who are taking on that risk can make informed choices. And our role is really to support that endeavor. An example I can give you is the United States, as I mentioned earlier, flood is a less understood risk. It's largely uncovered by the insurance industry, the private insurance industry. We recently developed a model after a tremendous effort, and that model can operate at a global scale. It means we can quantify risk for the entire United States, for a part of the United States, down to the very granular level. Now, for the first time, we are now able to answer questions like, what is a 100-year flood for the whole United States even look like? This question was very hard to answer 30 years ago if the question was, what does a hurricane of a 100-year magnitude from a financial point of view look like? Today, many people can give an answer to that question thanks to the existence of risk models. For flood, we are still in the early days, and we are quite excited that our model is now able to provide answers to those kinds of questions.